Well, good morning, everyone. We're reading through the book of Mark in the New Testament and doing our best to answer the question, along with the disciples, we find out, especially today, who is this Jesus? Who is this Jesus? And in our passage today, Jesus is talking and teaching his disciples and us about something that is I think a pretty common need for all of us to understand about fear. It's very common to have fears. It's very human things. I only have to name snakes, spiders, terrorists, public speaking, failure. And if I were to keep going with that list for long enough, I would bet that I could list out a whole lot of reasons for anxiety this morning, and I bet we could raise everybody's blood pressure about 20 or 30 points and then march out of here. What a great thing to do at church, huh? To do that. No, fear is a human thing. It is. It's a mixed bag. We know that. There are good fears and there's bad fears. Good fears help us survive, and they alert us to danger. It keeps children from putting their hands into fire or playing with rattlesnakes. And then there are also bad fears that paralyze us from doing what we know we ought to do. Bad fears keep me from interviewing for the job that I've always dreamed of because I'm afraid of being rejected. But fear is also a mixed bag because, quite honestly, it's the same ability that causes us to fear, the same part of our self that causes us to fear, that's also, which is this ability to remember a past experience and then project it into the future with that past experience in mind. And it's that same ability that gives us the ability to dream and to imagine about the future too. Let's just put a hypothetical case together. If you're a Patriots fan and you remember how much fun last Super Bowl was, and you're dreaming and imagining how good the game's going to be today because you think it just always happens that way for the Patriots, huh? And if you're not a Patriots fan, you'll remember how disappointed you were at the end of when the Patriots won it again last year, and you're imagining and dreading this afternoon should the Patriots win again. It's sort of the same things. Actually, Jesus spoke an awful lot about fear. But many times what Jesus said about fear was really succinct. In fact, 2 words: fear not. And sometimes he got real creative. He went to 4 words: do not be afraid. And you think to yourself, well, that's not very helpful, is it? That's not very helpful. Fear not, but I'm afraid. Fear not anyway. Well, that doesn't work with me very well. How about with you? So I think we need to go a little bit deeper as to what Jesus was saying. Last Wednesday in our study we're looking at similar passages. We're asking the question. Actually, the name of the series is Follow Jesus, and the speaker pulled up Matthew 10 verses 28 through 31. And it starts like this. It says, "Don't be afraid of those who want to kill your body, because they cannot touch your soul." Now, if somebody's after my body, I'm thinking killing the body is a pretty bad thing, isn't it? It's a pretty bad thing. But Jesus tells us not to be afraid of anyone who can kill your body because they can't touch your soul. I think Jesus wants us to remember that our body is our temporary earthly home, isn't it? He wants us to look at life from a long-range perspective. Our soul is the part of us that lives forever. And then he goes on in this same passage and he says, fear, which is tied up in that word fear, is be in awe of, respect in the highest way. He said, fear only God, who can destroy both soul and body in hell. And then he says, what is the price of 2 sparrows? 1 copper coin? But not a single sparrow can fall to the ground without your Father knowing it. And the very hairs on your head are numbered. So don't be afraid. You are more valuable to God than a whole flock of sparrows. See, in this teaching about fear, Jesus is telling us that there are levels of fear. And he says, I want you to think about this in terms of levels. Be more concerned about the forever part of life. God is the one who has power over the forever. And what is more, he is the one who knows us so well and values us so much that even the very hairs on our head are numbered. Think about that. He said, you are far more important than a whole myriad of sparrows. And I know each sparrow by name. That's why he said, you can trust me. That's why you can trust me. Now, his disciples, as we read through the Bible and through the Gospels, really did not get this very well at first. But Jesus, like any good teacher, never gave up. And he took advantage of some natural teaching moments. And that's where we're getting into our passage today in the book of Mark. We're going to start Mark chapter 4, beginning with verse 35. It says, as evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, let's cross to the other side of the lake. So they took Jesus in the boat and started out, leaving the crowds behind, although other boats followed. But soon a fierce storm came up. High waves were breaking into the boat and began to fill it with water. Now, when you read about the Sea of Galilee, it's actually a lake by technical terms, but it's called the Sea of Galilee. You find out that it's a very unique place. It sits 700 feet below sea level. It's the lowest freshwater lake in the world. And 30 miles to the north of it is Mount Hermon, which is the highest point in that area. It sits at 9,200 feet. So that's almost a 10,000 foot elevation change. There's a picture of Mount Hermon and the Sea of Galilee coming up. I think, there you go. And it gives you a little bit of perspective. That's a 10,000 foot elevation change within 30 miles. That's pretty drastic. Well, the cold air comes from the top of the mountains and it interacts with the warm, moist air coming up from the lake. And if you're a meteorologist, you can probably explain better how that works, but it produces some very impressive, quickly developing thunderstorms. And remember that some of Jesus' disciples were fishermen. In fact, fishermen right there on the Sea of Galilee. So they were very experienced with this kind of thing. And but this storm must have been a doozy, to speak in technical terms, because even these guys thought they were going to die. Listen as we read on this passage. It says Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat with his head on a cushion. And the disciples woke him up shouting, "Teacher, don't you care that we're going to drown? Don't you care that we're going to drown?" Now, this is one of the places that I think that all of us at one time or another can probably relate to the feeling that the disciples had. Jesus, I'm in the middle of a terrible storm and you are sleeping. Or at least it seems like you're sleeping. The psalmist wrote about this often. I just picked out a couple very first verses of some of the Psalms. Psalm 10, "Why do you hide from me, Lord, when I need you the most?" Psalm 13, "How long will you look the other way, Lord? I have a financial storm, a marriage storm, a kid storm, a parent storm, a job storm, a something kind of storm, and I am praying like crazy, but you seem to just be sleeping. What is up with that? What is up with that? Don't you care?" Now, these were Jesus' disciples. They were his closest friends. And folks, this was a literal storm, and Jesus was literally sleeping. This isn't even a metaphor right now. This was literal storm, literally sleeping right in front of him. And then we read, as we say the rest of the story, it says, when Jesus woke up, he rebuked the wind and said to the waves, "Silence, be still." And suddenly the wind stopped, and there was a great calm. And then he asked them, why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith? Why were they afraid? Seems pretty obvious to me. I mean, they were simply remembering their past experiences. They were probably imagining what could happen in the future because they knew friends, they knew other fishermen, maybe themselves, who had been caught in a storm like this, and maybe they had even heard of people drowning in situations like this. And this seems like a terrible storm. Mark writes that, and remember, Mark is writing this, but remember, this is actually Peter giving Mark the information. And Peter was a fisherman who told Mark about this encounter. And then Jesus rebukes the wind and the waves, and suddenly it's calm. And how do they react? And here's the last verses. It says, the disciples were absolutely terrified. And then they said, who is this man? Who is this man? They asked each other. Even the wind and the waves obey him. So the disciples are beginning to sort of process this event now. And they ask, who is this guy? Who is this guy that has power over nature? And maybe they remember back, he heals people. He is very different. But you would think, after this took place, that their first reaction would be, we're so relieved. We're so relieved. But that's not what it says. It says they were absolutely terrified. Terrified. Does that seem like a strange reaction to you? I don't think I saw that one coming. Did you? If you're reading through this. First, in the storm, it says they were afraid of drowning. They were afraid, but now, after Jesus quiets the winds and the waves, they are absolutely terrified. It's like afraid on steroids. In fact, they are mega afraid. In the original language, it says they feared a great fear. They feared a great fear. This fear eclipsed the first fear. They realized that though the wind, the waves filling the boat was something big, somehow they knew that they have just witnessed someone even bigger. Someone even bigger. They feared the storm, no doubt about it. It would have been something that could have killed their bodies. They feared a what in their life, a circumstance. And it was a powerful what, too. But now they had experienced a who. A who was even more powerful than even the winds and the waves obey him. Even the worst of the whats listen to this who. Think about that. This amazing teaching moment, one would think, would be indelibly etched in the disciples' minds and hearts forever. And now we read it 2,000 years later and we see Jesus' point. In the middle of all the whats that cause us to fear, there is a who that says, I want you to look at me. I want you to look at me. But we read on in the Gospels and realize that even with this display of power, along with many others, the disciples still didn't really understand, did they? And it's really easy to get down on the disciples, but I ask myself, would I have understood? I sometimes, at first reaction is think, how can you not see it? And then I ask myself, well, what about me? Where would my faith have been? I'm not really sure. I ask the question, do I get it today? Do I get it today? Do I really get it? Eventually, we know, of course, that Jesus would be arrested and all the disciples deserted him, and Peter would deny that he even knew Jesus, and then they would go into hiding, and most likely they thought they had been following a fraud, or at least they were very confused. That is until one day we see them in the book of Acts. And they were now living with a new courage and a new passion and a new boldness and a fearlessness that was very different from what they had before. They had seen the resurrection of Jesus, and he came back from the dead, and they'd finally figured out the answer to this question: who is this guy? He is the guy who rises from the dead. They knew he was the Son of God. He is the hope of the world, and he is the hope of every single person. So now they're going around to cities and towns, and they can't get the words out quickly enough. And they talk fearlessly, and they invite Jews and Gentiles to follow the resurrection of Jesus. And they are all eyewitnesses. And some people follow, and other people are very offended. And the disciples are arrested, and sometimes they're even flogged. And they faced all types of suffering and lots of storms. But friends, they were not afraid at that point, because they got it. Because they knew who they were following. The worst that could happen was the opposition could kill their bodies. And they just would laugh and say, "Ha, but you can't touch the real me. You can't touch my soul because of the resurrection of Jesus." Their focus was on who and not all the whats. When our focus is on who and not the whats, it doesn't mean that we don't fear sometimes, but fear loses its paralyzing grip on us. You know the difference? Sometimes fear absolutely causes us to just shut down. Does it mean that we're blind to the bad things that can happen? No. No, we still live life with eyes wide open. Does it mean that we stop looking for solutions, that we stop looking for new ideas, stop with medical treatments, because we're going to just sit back and passively, "Okay, Jesus, heal me now," leave it all to him? No. I think Jesus provides paths for us to take and options for us to follow. But it does mean that fear loses its death grip on us. I will absolutely admit, though, before God and you this morning, that though I know this, I'm certainly learning it every single day. This past week was certainly one of those times. Many of you know that we found out that we have a 20-year-old nephew that lives in California, and his dad found him dead in his bed on Tuesday morning. And we're still trying to process through that. What does all that mean? I'm firmly convinced that God puts people in our lives from time to time whose absolute laser-focused lock on Jesus allows them to walk through the toughest whats of life and help to inspire us too. I have one of those people in my life. His name is Pastor Bill Bartlett. When I first moved to Arizona, it was to work with him and to learn from him at the first congregation where I served. I didn't get to spend much time with Bill because God called Bill and his family to take a new call in a church in California shortly after that. However, we have kept in touch over the last 28 years. Other than my father, he's been the most influential mentor in my life when it comes to keeping our eye focus on Jesus rather than the storms of life. About 7 years prior to my arriving in Arizona, Pastor Bill received his first diagnosis of cancer. He was 33 years old. He was married with two very young children. And by God's amazing provision, Bill was blessed to enjoy a 30-year reprieve from cancer. He went through lots of treatment, and God chose to give him lots more time. However, in August of 2013, he received his first of 4 additional diagnoses of cancer. And over these past 4.5 years, since 2013, the pattern has been something like this. Receive the diagnosis, 6 months of treatment, and then 6 months of remission. hoping that it's forever remission, but only to find that there's another diagnosis of cancer that takes place. And his treatments have included chemo, stem cell transplants, immunotherapy, clinical trials, and even radiation. Currently, he's in remission and has been treatment-free for about 6 months right now. I've talked with him by phone, and he even visited me a couple of years ago, right here during one of his times of remission. I've stayed current with him mostly through email and through a blog that he writes that's entitled Lessons Learned, Opportunities Opened, and Purposes Pursued on the Treatment Trail. I want to read you an excerpt of his blog from about a week ago, his last one in his blog. He said, "When are you more tempted to falter in your relationship with Jesus Christ? In difficult times of illness? In times of severe trial and stress? Or are you more tempted to stumble in your walk with Jesus in good times? When life is going smoothly, when health is so good that you simply take it for granted? I don't know how it is for you, but I fear anything that distracts me from Jesus Christ, who alone is my Lord, Savior, my peace and salvation. And life is full of distracting threats, both earthly trials and temptations, and periods of blessing and smooth sailing. Either threatens to lure my affections and focus away from Him who created and redeemed and daily and lovingly sustains me." And then this next statement blew me away. He said, "I think I actually fear the latter distractions, that is, the smooth sailing, more than the former, the trials and the temptations." Said, I remember a holy moment back in 1983. That was during his first cancer. Months after successful treatment with my first bout with cancer, every single day for several months, I remembered my experience in the hospital, the multiple surgeries, the chemotherapy, and the gracious strength and power of Jesus Christ through those hard, even dark days in the hospital and treatment. I vowed upon finishing this treatment to never forget that time and how properly dependent I was every day on Christ's sufficient grace throughout those days. Then one day, a chill went up my spine, which actually frightened me. I realized that throughout the previous day, I had not remembered or thought about my cancer experience even once. That was a first. It was a warning to me that we humans can quickly forget just how fragile and dependent our lives on the Lord are. It scared me. In a recent post, I mentioned that the most frequently referenced commandment in the Bible is, "Be not afraid," and its cousins, "Fear not," and "Do not fear." This is commanded 207 times in the Bible. Entering a new year can be frightening. And as we enter 2018, I'm reminded that it's been 6 months since the radiation treatments eradicated the cancerous tumor in my clavicle area. 6 months have been the approximate time period for cancer to recur in my body over the last 4.5 years after receiving different treatments for each diagnosis. And then he says something that in my mind really sums up the reason for all fear. He says, as a new year dawns, we don't know what the future holds. James 4:14 reminds us of this stark truth. You do not know what tomorrow will bring. We do know, however, who holds our future, our Lord Jesus. He will not let anything come upon us that His grace, strength, and peace will not be able to withstand. I think he summed it up really well, didn't he? He said the root of most fear is almost always the unknown of the future. We don't know all the details of what's going to happen tomorrow. But when our trust is in Jesus, we do know the who. the one who does know. And it's because of the promises of that one who conquered death that Jesus can say to his closest friends, and he can say to us, he can say, do not be afraid. Fear not. He will not let anything, in Bill's words, he will not let anything come upon us that his grace, his strength, his peace will not be able to withstand. And quite honestly, is the future really that unknown? Think about it. One of these days, though we don't know when or how, our bodies are going to cease to function. As one of my mentors says, statistically speaking, the likelihood of that happening is still hovering right around 100%. Right around 100%. But when we put our trust in Jesus, the one who died for us, no one can touch that part of us that lasts forever. No one. So don't spend these years, whether they are 20 or 120. Don't spend them in fear. Don't live in fear, because you know the who. He's the one that holds the future. And the who is always greater than any what that comes up in any of our lives. Let's pray right now. Jesus, our eyes are on you. That's where we want them to be. Always. We trust you. When it's stormy, or even when life is going really well, and it's easy to just not trust you because we think we got it all under control. But God, I pray that you would just keep our eyes focused on you every single day, because you are the who, and the who is always greater than the what. In your name we pray.